Vel had never seen so many soldiers die in one place. He stood at the observation window of Hollow Station and watched another transport ship burn in the darkness of space. They had shot it down before it could reach the docking bay. That was the third ship this week, the fourth if he counted the medical frigate from 6 days ago. 47 days. That was how long they had been trapped here. 47 days of watching friends die. 47 days of counting bullets and food rations. 47 days of hoping that someone, anyone, would come to save them. His species was known across the galaxy for their sharp minds and careful planning. They did not panic. They did not act on emotion. They calculated, measured, and made logical decisions. But even Vel could feel something cold growing in his chest, something that felt very much like despair. The station shook as another explosion hit the outer walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere behind him, a wounded Pelian soldier screamed in pain. The medical supplies had run out 2 days ago. Now the doctors could only offer comfort and kind words. Vel turned away from the window and walked through the main corridor. Bodies lay on stretchers along both walls. Some were dead. Some were dying. Some simply stared at the ceiling with empty eyes, waiting for the end. He passed a group of soldiers cleaning their weapons. They were large creatures built for war with thick gray skin and 4 powerful arms, but even they looked tired, broken. One of them met Vel's eyes and slowly shook his head. No words were needed. They both knew the truth. The coalition was losing. 3,000 soldiers surrounded Hollow Station. They had ships, tanks, and endless ammunition. The defenders had 400 soldiers left, half of them wounded. They had enough food for maybe 5 more days, enough bullets for maybe 3. Vel entered the command center where General stood before a holographic map. The old's face was gray with exhaustion. His uniform hung loose on his thin body. He had not slept in days. "Any word from the coalition fleet?" Vel asked. "Did not look up from the map. They are still 9 days away. We will not last 9 days. Then we should consider surrender. They do not take prisoners, you know this." Vel did know this. The Dominion saw other species as insects to be crushed. Surrender meant death. Fighting meant death. There was no path forward that did not end in blood. The communication console suddenly beeped. A young Pelian officer rushed to answer it. His eyes went wide as he listened to the incoming message. "General," he said, his voice shaking, "a ship is approaching. It answered our distress signal." Hope flashed across his face. "A coalition battleship." "No, sir, it is. It is a human transport vessel." The room went silent. Vel felt his heart sink. Humans? He had heard stories about them, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about humans. They were a young species from a small planet called Earth. They had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. They were not particularly strong, not particularly fast, not particularly intelligent. They had no special abilities, no natural weapons, no advanced technology. And yet the galaxy whispered about them. Strange stories, impossible stories, stories about humans doing things that made no logical sense. Vel had never believed those stories. He believed in facts, numbers, and evidence. And the facts were simple. Humans were an unremarkable species with an unremarkable military. They could not save Hollow Station. "How many soldiers?" asked. The Pelian officer swallowed hard. 30, sir." Closed his eyes. Vel saw the last spark of hope die on the old general's face. 30 soldiers, whispered. "We asked for a fleet. They sent us 30 soldiers." The human transport ship docked 20 minutes later. Vel went to the landing bay to observe the new arrivals. He told himself it was his duty as a tactical advisor, but really, he was curious. He wanted to see these humans for himself. He wanted to understand why the galaxy told such strange stories about them. The airlock opened with a hiss of escaping air. The first human to step through was a man of average height with short black hair and a calm face. He wore simple combat armor, scratched and dented from many battles. A rifle hung across his back. His eyes were dark and steady, moving across the landing bay with quiet attention. Behind him came more humans, men and women of different sizes, different ages, different faces. They carried weapons and equipment. They moved with the easy confidence of experienced soldiers, but there were only 30 of them, 30 humans against 3,000. Vel watched the leader walk toward General. The human's boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. He stopped in front of the general and saluted. "Captain Park," he said, "7th Terran Response Unit, we received your distress call." Stared at the human for a long moment. "Captain Park, I must be honest with you. We requested a battle fleet. We are facing 3,000 enemy soldiers. Your 30 soldiers, while appreciated, cannot change the outcome of this siege." Captain Park did not seem surprised or offended. He simply nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. "General," he said, "with respect, I did not come here to change the outcome. I came here to fight." Vel frowned. The words made no sense to him. What was the point of fighting if you could not win? What was the point of dying for a lost cause? Captain Park turned and looked across the landing bay. His eyes moved over the wounded soldiers, the broken equipment, the blood stains on the floor. He took in everything with that same calm, steady gaze. Then he looked at General and spoke 5 words that Vel would never forget. "Show me the enemy positions." Something changed in that moment. Vel could not explain it. The air felt different. The wounded soldiers nearby lifted their heads. The warriors stopped cleaning their weapons and stared. It was not hope exactly. It was something stranger, something that did not fit into Vel's logical mind. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, these 30 humans knew something that the rest of the galaxy did not. Vel watched Captain Park follow General toward the command center. The other humans spread out through the landing bay, already checking defensive positions and talking to wounded soldiers. A female human with sharp eyes and a bandage on her cheek stopped beside Vel. She noticed him staring. "First time seeing humans in combat?" she asked. Vel nodded slowly. "I have heard stories, I never believed them." The woman smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something dark and heavy. "Keep watching," she said. "You will believe them soon enough." Her name was Lieutenant, and she was right. Before this siege was over, Vel would believe every story he had ever heard about humans. He would also learn new ones, ones that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. But that was still to come. For now, he simply watched the humans prepare for battle and wondered what kind of species walked willingly into certain death. He did not understand yet, but he would. The command center was crowded with officers from 3 different species, stood with their hands clasped behind their backs, their faces blank and thoughtful. Pelions paced nervously, their long tails twitching with anxiety, crossed their forearms and waited in grim silence. And in the middle of them, all stood Captain Park, studying the holographic map like it was a puzzle he intended to solve. Vel stood in the corner and watched. He had been given no official role in this meeting, but no one had asked him to leave. Perhaps they had forgotten he was there, or perhaps they simply did not care anymore. When death was certain, rank and protocol seemed less important. General pointed at the glowing map. Red dots surrounded the station in every direction. Each dot represented a unit. There were so many red dots that they almost blended together into a solid ring of death. "As you can see, Captain, the situation is simple," said. "They have complete control of the surrounding area. Their main force is positioned here, to the north. Their artillery is here, to the east. Their commander has set up headquarters in this abandoned mining facility to the south." Captain Park nodded but said nothing. His eyes moved across the map with slow, careful attention. Our forces are concentrated here in the central hub, continued. We have 400 soldiers, but only 200 are fit for combat. The rest are wounded. Our ammunition will last perhaps 3 days of heavy fighting. Food and water for 5 days. Medical supplies? Park asked. Gone, we have nothing left. Park nodded again. He walked around the holographic map, studying it from different angles. The room watched him in silence. Finally, a general named spoke up. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Human, he said, I mean no disrespect, but you have 30 soldiers. We have calculated the probabilities many times. Even with your reinforcement, our chance of survival is less than 4%. The mathematics do not lie. Park looked up at the massive. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger either, just that same calm, steady look. What was the temperature outside last night? Park asked. Blinked his 4 eyes in confusion. What? The temperature, how cold did it get? Vel frowned. What did temperature have to do with anything? They were cold-blooded, yes, but their armor protected them from environmental conditions. This question was irrelevant. A science officer checked his. -42 degrees, Captain, standard for this moon. And the solar flares, when is the next cycle? Approximately 18 hours from now. They will disrupt communications and sensor equipment for roughly 2 hours. Park nodded slowly. He was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the map. Then he asked another strange question. Are there maintenance tunnels beneath the eastern quadrant? General looked uncertain. Yes, there are old mining tunnels that run beneath the station, but they were sealed years ago. They are unstable and dangerous. But they connect to the surface. Some of them, yes, near the eastern ridge. But Captain, I do not understand what you are asking. These tunnels are not tactically significant. They are too narrow for troop movements, too unstable for equipment. Park smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but Vel saw it, and something about it made his skin feel cold. General, Park said, I would like to take my team into those tunnels tonight. The room erupted in confusion. Officers talked over each other, laughed, a deep booming sound that echoed off the walls. Into the tunnels, said. To do what? To control everything above ground. If you go into those tunnels, you will simply die in darkness instead of dying in battle. What is the purpose? Park waited for the noise to quiet down. Then he explained his plan. It was simple, terrifyingly simple. His team would move through the tunnels to the eastern ridge. They would surface behind enemy lines during the solar flare, when sensors would be blind. They would destroy the power relay station, cutting electricity to half their defensive perimeter. Then they would return through the tunnels while the coalition launched a counterattack against the weakened enemy lines. When Park finished explaining, the room was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence. The silence of people who thought they were hearing a madman speak. General spoke carefully, as if talking to a child. Captain Park, the probability of your team reaching the relay station is perhaps 15%. The probability of destroying it and returning alive is less than 8%. By every rational measure, your plan will fail. Probably, Park agreed. Then why suggest it? Park looked at the general with something almost like pity. Because 8% is better than 0%, General, and 0% is what you have right now. Vel stepped forward before he could stop himself. Captain, I must object. This plan ignores every principle of tactical doctrine. You are asking your soldiers to walk into almost certain death for a minimal chance of success. The mathematics clearly show. The mathematics show that we are all going to die anyway, Park interrupted. His voice was not angry, but it was firm. The mathematics showed that from the moment the surrounded this station, your calculations are not wrong, but they are incomplete. Incomplete how? Lieutenant spoke up from beside the doorway. Vel had not noticed her enter. She had been listening the whole time, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Your calculations measure what we can do," she said. "They do not measure what we are willing to do. There is a difference." Vel shook his head. "Willingness does not change probability." "Doesn't it?" Walked forward until she stood in front of Vel. She was shorter than him, but somehow she seemed larger. Her eyes burned with something that Vel could not name. "Let me ask you something. When your calculations told you that victory was impossible, what did you do? You stopped trying. You started waiting to die. You gave up." Vel wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat, because she was right. "We do not calculate whether we can win," said. "We calculate whether it is worth fighting anyway. And then we fight, no matter what the numbers say. That is the difference between your species and mine." General raised his hand for silence. He looked older than Vel had ever seen him, tired and broken and ready for the end. But there was something new in his eyes too, something small and fragile. "Captain Park," said slowly, "if I approve this mission, you may lose your entire team. You may die for nothing." Park nodded, "Yes." "And you still want to go?" "We did not come here to survive, General. We came here to fight. Let us fight." Was quiet for a long time. The room waited. No one moved. No one breathed. Finally, the old general nodded. "Very well. You have my permission. May whatever gods you believe in watch over you." Park saluted. Then he turned and walked out of the command center, his team following behind him. Vel watched them go. His logical mind screamed that this was wrong, that they were walking to their deaths for nothing, that mathematics did not lie. But somewhere deeper, in a place he did not fully understand, another thought whispered. What if the mathematics were missing something? What if there was something in the universe that equations could not measure? He did not know the answer, but in 18 hours when the solar flares disrupted the sky, he would find out. Vel made a decision. He would go with them. He would watch these humans attempt the impossible. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally understand why the galaxy told such strange stories about them. The tunnels were darker than anything Vel had ever experienced. He walked behind Sergeant Menu, a large human who carried a heavy weapon that looked like it weighed more than Vel himself. Ahead of them, Captain Park led the way with a small flashlight. The beam of light seemed weak and fragile against the endless black. 30 humans had entered the tunnels. 28 now remained. 2 had stayed behind at the entrance to guard their escape route. The rest moved in silence through the narrow passages, their boots splashing in shallow pools of water that had collected over years of neglect. Vel had insisted on coming. Captain Park had tried to refuse, but Vel had explained that he needed to observe. He needed to understand. The human had studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay close," Park had said. "Stay quiet, and if I tell you to run, you run, understood?" Vel had understood. He was not a fighter. He was an observer. If things went wrong, he would only slow them down. The tunnel walls pressed close on both sides. The ceiling was so low that the taller humans had to duck their heads. The air smelled old and dead, like a tomb that had been sealed for centuries. Vel noticed something as they walked, something that surprised him deeply. The humans were afraid. He could see it in the way Private gripped his weapon. The young man's hands trembled slightly. His eyes jumped at every shadow, every drip of water. He was terrified. Sergeant Menu whispered something under his breath. Vel's translator picked up fragments of words, old words, prayer words. The massive soldier, who looked like he could break Vel in half without effort, was praying to gods that Vel did not know. Even Lieutenant, who had seemed so confident in the command center, kept touching the bandage on her cheek. A nervous habit, a sign of fear hidden beneath her sharp eyes. Vel did not understand. They did not go into battle when they were afraid. Fear meant that the situation was too dangerous. Fear was a signal to retreat, to reconsider, to find a better option. But these humans were afraid, and they kept walking forward anyway. He moved closer to Corporal, the team's medic. She was a small woman with gentle hands and a medical bag strapped to her back. Of all the humans, she seemed not because she was not afraid, Vel could see the tension in her shoulders, but because she had accepted her fear somehow. "Can I ask you something?" Vel whispered. Glanced at him and nodded. "You are afraid, all of you are afraid, I can see it, so why do you keep going?" Was quiet for a moment. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Their footsteps echoed off the stone walls. "Fear is not the problem," she finally said. "Fear is just your body telling you that something matters. The problem is when you let fear make your decisions for you." "I do not understand." "Of course you don't. Your species runs from fear. You see it as a warning sign, something to avoid," smiled softly in the dim light. "We see it differently. Fear tells us that we care about something. It tells us that something is worth protecting. And when something is worth protecting, you don't run away. You run toward it. Even if running toward it means death. Especially then." Vel wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that this made no logical sense. That survival was the foundation of all intelligent behavior. That evolution itself demanded that creatures protect their own lives above all else. But he said nothing, because deep down, he was beginning to realize that humans had not evolved like other species. Something had gone differently on their small blue planet. Something had made them willing to die for things that had nothing to do with their own survival. Captain Park raised his fist. Everyone stopped. They had reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. Park consulted a showing ancient maps of the mining system. He pointed left, and they continued. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time moved strangely in the dark. Finally, they saw light ahead, a faint gray glow coming from a crack in the tunnel ceiling. "We're under the relay station," Park whispered. "Everyone get ready." The humans moved with practiced efficiency. Sergeant Minu and 2 others set up explosive charges. Private checked his communications equipment. Lieutenant organized the team into defensive positions. Vel watched prepare medical supplies. Her hands were steady now. Whatever fear she felt had been pushed aside, replaced by focus and purpose. Then everything went wrong. A section of the ceiling crumbled. Dust and rocks fell. And through the hole, Vel saw the face of a soldier staring down at them. They screamed in alarm. "Contact!" shouted. Weapons fire erupted. The tunnel filled with noise and light and chaos. Vel threw himself against the wall as energy bolts flew past his head. They poured down through the hole. 2, then 5, then 10. They had been patrolling above, and now they knew the humans were here. Sergeant Minu stepped forward. His heavy weapon roared like thunder. The first wave fell, but more came behind them. "Finish the charges," Park commanded. "We have 2 minutes." Took a bolt to his leg. He fell screaming. Was there instantly, dragging him behind a rock formation while still firing her sidearm with her other hand. Vel had never seen anything like it. The medic, the healer, was running toward the danger instead of away from it. She was putting herself between her wounded teammate and the enemy, using her own body as a shield. "Cover me," shouted. She ran forward directly into the enemy fire. Vel watched in horror as a bolt struck her shoulder. She spun, fell, and then pushed herself back up. Blood ran down her arm. She kept firing. Why? Vel's mind screamed. Why would she do that? But he knew why. She was drawing fire away from the soldiers setting the explosives. She was sacrificing herself so the mission could succeed. Minu held the main corridor alone. 4 rushed him at once. He killed 2, knocked another aside with his weapon stock, and took a knife across his arm from the 4th before snapping its neck with his bare hands. He was bleeding, he was exhausted, but he kept fighting. "Charges set," someone yelled. "Everyone out now." The humans retreated into the tunnel. Minu and covered the rear, still firing. Vel ran with them, his heart's pounding in his chest. Behind them, the relay station exploded. The sound was deafening. The tunnel shook. Rocks fell from the ceiling. They ran through the darkness. Injured soldiers helped each other. No one was left behind. Not even the dead. Vel saw two humans carrying fallen comrades over their shoulders. When they finally reached the exit, the sky above the station had gone dark. Half the perimeter was without power. Their sensors were blind. Their communications were dead. The mission had succeeded, but it had cost them. Vel counted the survivors as they emerged into the cold night air. 22 humans walked out of the tunnels. 8 had gone in and never come back. Captain Park stood at the tunnel entrance, counting his people. His face showed nothing, but Vel saw his hands shake slightly as he helped a wounded soldier sit down. "Captain," Vel said quietly, "I am sorry for your losses." Park looked at him with tired eyes. "This is what it costs," he said. "This is always what it costs." "Was it worth it?" Park did not answer immediately. He looked up at the dark sky, at the blind enemy positions, at the wounded soldiers around him. "Ask me tomorrow," he said. "If any of us are still alive, I'll tell you then." Somewhere in the distance, coalition artillery began to fire. The counterattack had begun. And Vel finally understood something about humans that he had never understood before. They did not fight because they expected to win. They fought because some things were worth fighting for, even when winning was impossible. It was not logical. It was not rational. But as he watched these bleeding, exhausted humans prepare to fight again, Vel thought that maybe logic and rationality were not the only things that mattered in the universe. Maybe courage mattered too. Maybe love. Maybe stubborn, foolish, beautiful defiance. The night was far from over, and Vel would stay to watch it end, whatever that ending might be. The counterattack started well. Coalition forces pushed forward through the darkened sections of the perimeter. Without power, the enemy's automated defenses were useless. Without sensors, they could not see the attack coming until it was too late. Vel watched from a forward observation post as warriors crashed into lines. The massive four-armed soldiers roared as they fought, their battle cries echoing across the frozen battlefield. Behind them, marksmen picked off enemy officers with precise shots. Pelion engineers worked to disable remaining enemy equipment. For the first time in 47 days, hope seemed real. But war is never simple, and the commander was not a fool. The first sign of trouble came from the south. A Pelion scout ran into the observation post, his tail rigid with fear. "Reinforcements," he gasped. "Reinforcements from the southern mining facility, hundreds of them. They're flanking our main force." Vel felt his blood turn cold. He grabbed his communicator. "General, we have enemy reinforcements approaching from the south. Our forces will be surrounded if they continue the advance." His voice came back, heavy with exhaustion. "I see them. All units fall back to defensive positions. Repeat, fall back." But falling back was not so easy. The coalition forces were spread across a wide area. Some units received the order too late. Others were too deep in enemy territory to retreat safely. The second wave hit like a hammer. Vel watched in horror as the battle turned. Coalition soldiers who had been advancing with confidence were suddenly running for their lives. The organized attack became chaos. Units lost contact with each other. Commanders screamed orders that no one could hear. And then the coalition line broke. It happened on the eastern flank, near where the humans had emerged from the tunnels. A group of Pelion soldiers simply stopped fighting. They dropped their weapons and ran, panic overwhelming their training. When one unit runs, others follow. It is a rule of war as old as war itself. The retreat became a rout. Soldiers pushed past each other, trampling wounded comrades in their desperation to escape. Officers tried to restore order, but no one was listening. The fear had become a living thing, spreading from soldier to soldier like a disease. Vel saw the end coming. In minutes, perhaps less, they would break through completely. They would pour into Hollow Station. Everyone inside would die. And then something happened that Vel would remember until his last breath. Captain Park walked forward. Not ran, walked, slow and steady like he was taking a morning stroll. He moved against the flow of retreating soldiers heading directly toward the enemy. His rifle was in his hands. His face was calm. Behind him, the remaining humans followed. 22 soldiers, many of them wounded, all of them exhausted. Lieutenant walked with one arm hanging useless at her side. Sergeant Minu limped from a wound to his leg. Private, who should have been in the medical bay, hobbled forward with bandages wrapped around his thigh. They formed a line across the retreat path, a thin line of humans between the fleeing coalition and the advancing. Vel grabbed an officer who was running past. "What are they doing? They will be killed." The officer shook free and kept running. He did not care about the humans. He only cared about survival. But Vel cared. Somehow, without meaning to, he had started to care. He watched as the human line braced for impact. The first wave of crashed against them like a wave against rocks. Energy bolts flew. Soldiers fell. Blood stained the frozen ground. And the humans held. They should not have been able to hold. 22 soldiers against hundreds of enemies. The mathematics were clear. The outcome was certain. But the humans held anyway. Vel heard screaming orders, her voice raw with pain and fury. "Hold the line. Nobody moves. Nobody falls back." Minu's heavy weapon roared continuously. The barrel glowed red from heat, but he kept firing. When the weapon finally jammed, he swung it like a club, smashing it into a soldier's skull. Barely able to stand, sat on the ground with a communication device. He called in artillery strikes with steady precision, directing fire from coalition guns that were still operational. Explosions bloomed behind the advance, cutting off their reinforcements. And at the center of it all, Captain Park fought with quiet, terrible efficiency. He did not shout. He did not waste movements. Every shot found a target. When his rifle ran empty, he drew a pistol. When the pistol ran empty, he drew a knife. Vel did not understand what he was seeing. These humans were dying. Every moment more of them fell. And yet they did not break. They did not run. They stood in the path of certain death and refused to move. The retreating coalition soldiers began to slow. They looked back at the human line. They saw 22 soldiers doing what 400 had failed to do. And something changed in their eyes. A warrior stopped running. He turned around. He raised his weapon and walked back toward the fight. Then another soldier stopped, and another, and another. They did not return because they thought they could win. They returned because they were ashamed. Because 22 humans were willing to die for them, and they could not live with the knowledge that they had run away. The tide of retreat slowed, stopped, and reversed. Coalition soldiers reformed their lines. Officers regained control. Fresh ammunition was distributed. Medics began treating the wounded. And at the center of it all, the human line kept holding. The commander saw what was happening. He ordered a full assault on the human position. If he could break them, the coalition would collapse again. Everything depended on those 22 soldiers. The fighting became brutal. Close quarters, hand to hand. Vel saw the medic treating a wounded human with one hand while firing a pistol with the other. He saw a young human soldier, barely more than a child, drag a fallen banner from a dead enemy's hands and raise it high before being shot down. He saw humans die, one after another, fighting to the last breath. But they did not break. As dawn painted the sky pink and gold, the attack finally faltered. Their soldiers had fought all night. They were exhausted, confused, demoralized. They had expected easy victory. Instead, they had found a wall of stubborn, impossible resistance. The commander ordered a retreat. His forces pulled back to regroup, to rest, to prepare for another assault. But they would not attack again. Vel would learn later that they pulled out of the system entirely within 6 days. Their commander wrote in his report that the coalition forces were irrational and therefore unpredictable. He did not mention the humans specifically. Perhaps he was too ashamed. When the sun rose fully, Vel walked to the human line. Bodies lay everywhere. Human bodies. The ground was red and brown with blood. The air smelled like smoke and death. 11 humans stood among the fallen, just 11. Captain Park sat on a rock staring at nothing. His uniform was torn. His face was covered in blood and dirt, but he was alive. Vel approached slowly. He did not know what to say, what words existed for what he had witnessed. "Captain," he said softly. Park looked up. His eyes were hollow, filled with a grief that Vel could not comprehend. He had lost 19 soldiers in one night, 19 friends, 19 people he was responsible for. "We held," Park said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, you held." "Did it matter? Did any of it matter?" Vel looked at the battlefield. He looked at the coalition soldiers who had returned to fight. He looked at the forces retreating in the distance. "Captain," he said, "I have calculated military probabilities my entire life. I have never seen numbers that could explain what happened here tonight. By every measure, you should have failed. You should have died for nothing." Park said nothing. He just waited. "But you did not fail," Vel continued. "And I think I finally understand why. You did not fight to win. You fought so that others would remember what fighting looked like. You fought so that soldiers who had given up would see what courage meant. You made them ashamed of their fear." Park closed his eyes. "I just did not want to die running. None of us did." "Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is everything." Somewhere behind them, the coalition began to sing. It started with a deep, rumbling war song that Vel had not heard in years. Then the Pelions joined in, their high voices weaving through the deeper tones. Finally, even some added their voices, though singing was not their way. They sang for the humans who had saved them. They sang for the dead who had made it possible. And Captain Park, sitting alone on his rock, finally let the tears fall. The battle was over, but Vel knew that what happened here would never be forgotten. Stories would spread across the galaxy. Stories about 30 humans who had walked into certain death and made it mean something. This was the day Vel truly understood the human reputation. And he knew he would never see the universe the same way again. 3 days after the battle, the coalition relief fleet finally arrived. Vel stood at the observation window and watched the massive ships descend from orbit. Battle cruisers, carriers, troop transports, the force that should have arrived weeks ago. The force that would have prevented all of this death, all of this suffering. They were too late to save anyone, but they were not too late to witness what had survived. The medical bay was full of wounded soldiers. Doctors worked alongside Pelion surgeons and healers, and in the corner, separated from the others by a curtain, lay the humans. Vel walked past rows of injured coalition soldiers until he reached that corner. He pulled the curtain aside gently. 6 humans lay on beds, unconscious or sleeping. Their wounds were severe. The doctors said some of them might never walk again. Others would carry scars for the rest of their lives. But they were alive. That was more than anyone had expected. Captain Park sat in a chair beside Private's bed. The young soldier was unconscious, his leg wrapped in thick bandages. The doctors had saved the leg, but only barely. Park looked up as Vel entered. His face was gray with exhaustion. He had not slept since the battle ended. He would not sleep until he knew all his people were safe. "The fleet is here," Vel said. Park nodded slowly. "I saw." Vel pulled up a chair and sat beside the captain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft beeping of medical equipment and the distant rumble of ships landing outside. Finally, Vel asked the question that had been burning in his mind for 3 days. "Captain, may I ask you something?" Park glanced at him. "You can ask." "Why, your probability of survival was less than 8%. By every rational measure, you should have retreated with us. You should have saved your own lives. But instead, you stood in front of the enemy and let them kill you. Why?" Park was quiet for a long time. He looked at its pale face, at the bandages and machines keeping the young man alive. "Because you were behind us," he finally said. Vel shook his head. "I do not understand. There were strangers to you. We had never met before. There was no strategic value in protecting us. No alliance. No obligation. We were nothing to you." "You were not nothing. Then what were we?" Park turned to look at Vel directly. His eyes were tired, but something burned deep within them. Something that Vel could not name. "You were people who needed help," Park said simply. "You were afraid and alone and dying, and we could do something about it. Maybe not much, maybe not enough, but something. But you died for us. 19 of your soldiers died for strangers." Park's face twisted with pain. The wounds were fresh. They would never fully heal. "My grandmother used to say something," he said softly. "She grew up during hard times on Earth, times when people had to choose between saving themselves and helping others. She told me once that a person's true size is measured by what makes them stand when everything tells them to fall." He paused, collecting himself. "We stood because someone had to. If not us, then who? If we had run away, what would that have made us? We would have survived, maybe, but we would have been different people, smaller people. We would have been people who let others die when we could have helped." Vel considered these words carefully. They went against everything he had been taught. They believed in logic, probability, and self-preservation. They calculated costs and benefits. They made rational decisions. But there was nothing rational about what the humans had done. Nothing logical about dying for strangers in a frozen station at the edge of known space. And yet, as Vel sat in that medical bay, he realized something that changed him forever. The humans were right. Not tactically, not strategically, not in any way that could be measured or calculated, but in a way that was deeper than mathematics, a way that spoke to something buried in the heart of every living being. They were right because some things mattered more than survival, because courage and sacrifice and love were not weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be celebrated, because the galaxy needed species who would run toward fire instead of away from it. Vel stood slowly. He looked down at Captain Park, at this exhausted, broken, magnificent human being. "Captain," he said, "I have served in the coalition military for 30 years. I have studied tactics and strategy under the greatest minds of 4 species. I thought I understood war. I thought I understood courage." He paused. "I was wrong. What you and your soldiers did here, it was not in any textbook. It was not in any training manual. It was something else entirely, something I do not have a word for." Park managed a small, tired smile. "We call it being human." "Yes," Vel said softly, "I suppose you do." The story spread across coalition space within days. Ships carried it from system to system. Soldiers told it in barracks and mess halls. Politicians discussed it in chambers of government. Historians began writing accounts that would be read for centuries. The story of Hollow Station. The story of 30 humans who walked into certain death and refused to break. It was not told as propaganda. The coalition did not need to exaggerate or embellish. The simple truth was powerful enough. 30 soldiers had held the line against thousands. 11 had walked away. And through their sacrifice, they had saved 500 lives. But the story was more than numbers. It was about something that the galaxy had forgotten. Something that civilizations lose when they grow too old, too careful, too logical. Hope, courage. the willingness to stand for something even when standing means dying. The story became a legend, and legends have power. When the next war came 3 years later, the galaxy's first question was always the same: are the humans coming? And if the answer was yes, everything changed. Morale soared. Soldiers fought harder. Commanders planned bolder strategies, not because the humans were the strongest or the most numerous, but because their presence meant something. It meant that someone would stand when everyone else wanted to fall. Vel served as an ambassador for 40 more years after Hollow Station. He traveled to 100 worlds. He negotiated treaties and resolved conflicts. He became one of the most respected diplomats in Coalition history. And everywhere he went, people asked him about the humans. Young officers wanted to know what made them so special. Politicians wanted to understand their secret. Scientists wanted to study their psychology and biology. Vel always gave the same answer. When we calculated the odds, he would say, we stepped back. We saw that victory was impossible and we accepted defeat. But the humans did not calculate the odds of winning. They calculated the cost of stepping back. They looked at the people behind them, the people depending on them, and they decided that the cost of retreat was higher than the cost of death. He would pause, letting the words sink in. That is what makes them terrifying, he would continue. That is what makes them beautiful. They do not fight because they think they will win. They fight because some things are worth fighting for, even when losing is certain. They measure victory not in survival but in meaning. Young soldiers would nod, pretending to understand. But Vel knew that most of them did not truly grasp it. You could not understand humans by hearing stories about them. You had to see them in action. You had to watch them walk into fire without hesitation. You had to see them die with smiles on their faces because they knew their death would protect someone else. Only then would you understand. Vel was very old when he finally retired. He returned to a small house overlooking a quiet valley. He spent his final years writing his memoirs, trying to put into words the things he had seen and learned. The last chapter was about Hollow Station, about Captain Park and Lieutenant and Sergeant Menu, about Private and Corporal, and all the others whose names the galaxy would never forget. He finished writing on a cold morning, with frost on the windows and silence in the air. He set down his pen and read the final paragraph one last time. I have lived a long life, he had written. I have seen wonders that most beings can only dream of. But the most wonderful thing I ever witnessed was a small group of humans standing in front of an army, refusing to run, refusing to break, refusing to let strangers die when they could do something about it. I did not understand it then. I'm not sure I fully understand it now. But I know this: as long as there are humans in the galaxy, there is hope. Because they are the species that will fight for you even when fighting is madness. They are the species that will die for you even when dying changes nothing. And in a universe of cold equations and logical choices, that kind of beautiful foolishness is worth more than all the calculations ever made. Vel closed his book and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, humans were still fighting, still protecting, still refusing to surrender when surrender was the only logical choice. He smiled. And for the first time in his long, careful, calculated life, he felt something that equations could never measure. He felt grateful. Grateful that in all the vast darkness of the universe, there was a small species from a small planet that burned so very brightly. The humans. The ones who ran toward fire. The ones who gave the galaxy something to believe in. The end.